Okay. Again, I hope everyone can see the screen. Romans, the first chapter. And this week, we'll be picking it up, starting at verse 21 and finishing this chapter. I'd like to thank everyone for taking a time out to come to the Biblical School of Global Liberation for All Oppressed Peoples. And we appreciate your presence. And hopefully, we will learn some more truths. Okay. Now, we were looking at a few things, and with the previous weeks about the Messiah, about the gospel, we looked at a few things about the injustice of men and the unrighteousness of men, which is the injustice of men suppresses or hold back the truth of God. And we was touching on some of that. We touched on the saints, so remember this. The purpose of going over it was to set the context, not just for the book of Romans, but for the overall ministry of the apostles. Understanding their context, what they're dealing with, learning their language about the Messiah, begin to learn the language about faith and stuff like that. So Paul, the apostles, Paul or Saul, was bringing a few things to the table at the close of this chapter. And it's something that the so-called religious world, they reject social activism. The so-called religious world, not all of them. I have found those who do not reject social activism. What's peculiar about that group is that they're questionable about the law. And I've seen that as a difference with a lot of so-called people who believe in liberation theology, even authors and who wrote different books. Many of the authors that I have read and admire their information and knowledges that God have given them, I've, still the disappointing part is that they reject or they sort of ignore the laws that was given. Liberation theology talks about Jesus and justice, but it's not in the context of the law. So that is something that I think is a mistake. So, so our position again, so we may talk about liberation theology. You may hear other people talk about liberation theology, but still you want to proceed with caution. Even the literature we read and we're beginning to read, just understand that they don't necessarily deal with the laws. So some of them, or at least the majority I have run across. But you have this other side of the people who believe in social justice, but they reject the creator. And that's another dilemma, because it's a formula. The Bible has a formula. And in order for us to receive the desired results, we have to go exactly by the pattern or the formula. So to just believe so-called in God isn't enough, or believe that Jesus died and rose. Jesus himself said you need works. So you're still incomplete in the formula, no matter how you look at it. Some may say, what is weightier and this and that. I haven't sat down with the council of the Almighty and have the authority to determine what's weightier and what's not. Only thing I could tell you is that what he prescribed. Now, people, their own hearts could take them somewhere else and proceed with caution, because your heart is deceitful. A formula he's given. Now, to me, it's all on par. You need it all. I'm not that cancel culture kind of a guy. Okay, this exclude that when it comes down to the scripture. No, you need them both. So the people who are struggling or who want justice, who claim they want justice, but they want to try to achieve it outside the power of God, this force that is the originator of justice, you won't achieve it. And then those who want to know God and be closer to God outside of justice and think that just pronouncing with your lips alone and believe that Jesus died and rose, you're not completing the formula. You're not going to get what you're looking for. You're going to have, with James argue, show me your faith by your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works, James argued. So it's important to put together the entire formula. It must all work together in order for us to achieve the desired results. And I'm here to tell you, anybody for the last 2,000 years, that's all you ever had was people confess with their lips. And that's what the Messiah say, they confess with their lips. They believe on the Messiah. They believe I died and rose. They believe I'm the Son of God. They confess with their lips, but their heart is far from him. Why? It's because they don't want to accept the works that brings into realization the purpose and the mission of the Christ, of the kingdom of God, of the promises of Abraham. So going through these studies, it's important because we want to synthesize it. We have to put it together. And all that to be said is that there's something about when people try to establish or think that they're going to build any kind of society outside of the God of heaven, it will not work. It will not work. Something is going to happen because we don't understand a human being. I don't care if someone could sit up here and tell me he understands a human being. I do not believe him. The human being, the earth we live in, is so many mysteries here. So we need to go by the formula, because the one who designed us and designed the earth, he have given us knowledges, and there's certain knowledges he have withheld. And since we haven't mastered all knowledges, we need not have the audacity to figure, okay, this isn't necessary, this is necessary, when it comes down to the word of the Elohim, the word of the one whom Abraham served. So let's look at this, brothers and sisters. And like my instructor and elder had taught me, now let us proceed and let the text, let the Bible talk a little bit or a lot of it. And let's see, just by putting together some evidence, we want to look at some of the things Paul was explaining. And remember, he's arguing already that they didn't know God. And so let us not forget the foundation of his argument is that men became vain in their imaginations because they didn't glorify God. And so what we're about to read in the closing of this chapter is a result of the human being turning away from the power who created all of this. He knows what exactly can happen if we don't follow the rules. And he gave us warning. So we're going to look at that a little bit. But remember, this is being built off of They glorify not the Elohim. And we're going to look at some strange things. And it happens over and over and over again, meaning that as long as men follow a certain pattern, there is always a certain result that results from it, that comes from it, I should say. So in Romans, the first chapter, starting now at verse 21, and we're going to begin, hold on one second, excuse me. Let me write something down. Okay, yes, Romans, the first chapter, 794. Okay, now notice what he's saying here. Because that when they knew God, and we built an argument last week on them knowing God. Now, I want to read something else to you that can also build the argument that I'm giving, that this idea of knowing God was found in the society, and God is realized and is glorified from human beings working together in harmony with the rest of the creation. And I want to read something here to also build that argument in 2 Peter. Let's go to 2 Peter. I didn't read it last week. I wasn't intending to, but in your readings, you probably have run across it. But just in case you haven't, it's something, or haven't yet, it's something that I want to definitely bring to our attention if we're building that argument. 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2. And in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, notice what's said. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5. It says, God was talking about how Peter's making reference to the cataclysmic event that transpired in the first world. And we have studies and teachings on that first world and why it collapsed. Same reasons, injustice. The Bible in Genesis 6 says violence. Look the word violence up. I think it's charagma. No. That might be what you call it? Mark. Violence in Genesis chapter 6. If you look it up, it means injustice. It means injustice. Genesis chapter 6. So it was destroyed for the same reasons. Okay, I just want to bring that to our members. Now look what he's saying about Noah. Okay, look what he's saying about Noah. He said, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. A preacher of righteousness. Now, in order for Noah to be a preacher of righteousness, he will have to stand for justice, right? If we look it up in the Hebrew dictionary even, and we looking up righteousness, we'll find justice. And now, if we're looking it up in the Greek, okay, and we have shown already in our other classes and our uh, definitions, that righteousness means justice. So Noah was a preacher, a public carrier of righteousness or justice. So what will that, what now, if Noah is a teacher of righteousness, then do you think he would have taught his sons? Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? Now, with that being said, if Ham, Shem, and Japheth have been exposed to justice and righteousness from the teachings of their father, this can explain the construction of their early societies and how they conducted themselves with one another until they corrupted themselves. So when we look at the text carefully, we will see why Paul can argue that they knew God. You know, he's going way back before Rome was an empire, before Greece was an empire. All right. Now, with that being said, let's move forward now. Because that when they knew God, I want to find that, I believe it's 2555. And in the Hebrew, where you will find that word violence. I believe it's 2555 when you find the word violence. And that's what aggravates me sometimes, because I try to look for it. That's why I don't pay to hurry up and do stuff. You got to take your time to do it right. And but anyhow, they fell for the same reasons. And Noah was there to put them back on track. And now, post-flood, the children of Noah, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish hearts was darkened. Why were they foolish heart darkened? Because when they knew God, or when God was being revealed to them through the creation, and we're going to find in chapter 2 of Romans, through the consciousness, that how God communicates with men, and what we read in the early societies, they wasn't thankful. Now, that's not to say all of them wasn't that way. We're not, that's one thing you have to understand. We're not, when the Bible make reference to things, he's not talking about 100% of the people did this. In the beginning, let me add, meaning there just are a few that corrupt society. And I want to address that a little bit today too, because there is something where to attack this problem of regeneration of the human race. You have some who address the issues, people in their deplorable conditions. But if you notice carefully, the Messiah, when he came on the scene, there's very few passages of the Messiah rebuking and scorning the common man. Okay? He told the prostitute, don't sin no more, but there's very few, and he didn't scorn her. In fact, when they wanted to stone the one in adultery, he said, you without sin cast the first stone. Because the ones who wanted to bring her before the judgment seats were probably the lawyers and the scribes, the judges. And it's the judges and the rulers of society are often quick to condemn the poor and the common man. That's why the Proverbs talks about how the rich man could speak roughly, but the poor man always got to make entreaties. He always have to bow the head. The rich man mess up and speak arrogantly. The poor man do right and still gotta you know, make supplications. This is the Proverbs teach. So if we look at what Jesus of Nazareth is dealing with, most of his rebukes and his confrontations were with the so-called ruling class. And I'm going to show you why, God willing, as we close for tonight's session. So therefore, where do you attack to fix it? The Bible clearly tells you how you got to attack where it went astray. Where did it all start? And so we could look at the people. That's not to say the people in the neighborhood they don't need to be reproved. Of course they need to be reproved, but you have to definitely, or else you're wasting your time. I will argue, you have to definitely address the source of the problem. It's like a person mopping up water on the floor, but the faucet's still leaking, and you just mopping water up, but the faucet's still leaking. You're going to mop from here to eternity until you eliminate the leak on the faucet. This is important for us to understand, being theoreticians. And again, you know, as we approach this, I'd let everybody know when you come in, I know this may be a little different, but just be honest with yourself. Okay, is it something you believe? Is it something that you're willing to go forward with? You do yourself a favor, just being honest with yourself. And if it's something that you do sincerely believe, then you pray on it so the Almighty can increase and bless your knowledge and understanding. But, you know, I've just, you know, and I'm letting people know that for many years, just dealing with that and running into people who, after a while, realized they never agreed. They sat among and never agreed. But as I was told by another brother who confessed some stuff, he said, people might not be with the arguments being presented, but if they can't refute it, they'll go along with it. And I've come to find that it's true. Like, people I've known for some time, come to find out they ain't never agreed with, you know, this route, So it's important, just be honest with yourself, because in order for us to grow in unity, we all have to believe the same thing. And that's not to force you to believe it. We present the evidence, you do the research, and be a willing soldier. And for the record, for the brothers and sisters, I know I did receive the email about a request for membership. God willing, we definitely, I didn't get a chance to get back this week, but we're going to address that. I believe if the sisters on who requested sent me the email, we got it, and God willing, we working it, and God willing, you'll be a part, and pray that you know, we can grow, all of us who believe and want to be members, to grow into a close, tight-knit family, ready to do the work to find other members of the family who are searching for Christ. Now, I said all of that, so now let's move this, go a little further. I just want to put a little bit of that out there, all right? So be honest with yourself, understanding now that the imaginations and the foolish hearts of people will be darkened if they do not glorify God. And so therefore, even understanding what it means to glorify him is important too, see? Not just our imaginations, but so these are key things when we're reading this critically, taking our time, look at the words. So when we're looking at glorify him, we don't glorify him as God, we could get thrown off. And this is what had happened. And notice the problem. When they didn't glorify God, and they became vain in their imaginations, what did they think of themselves? Well, verse 22 says they profess themselves to be wise. See, they consider themselves to be wise. So that's dangerous. See, you think you're on top of the game, and you think you're wise, you think you got everything figured out. But yet you don't realize that you have become vain in your imagination, and your foolishness, the foolishness of your heart, is driving you into darkness. And you're going to become as a fool. And this is what began to happen inside of the society. Why, brothers and sisters? Why? Because Paul argued in the previous verses, because the truth of God was held or restrained by the injustice of men. Now, the challenge is, as we move forward, is to no longer think about or to broaden our horizon and our perspectives on some of the things Paul's going to name. Broaden it, not just from the neighborhood of people we know them did something crazy or bad. Let's take this on a whole nother scale. And remember, I told you the Messiah addressed who? When he came, most of his rebukes were to the ruling class. Why? Why didn't he just ignore the ruling class and just go deal with the people who was in fornication and all this other stuff? How did he deal with them? Because through social science, you begin to understand, I got to deal with the root of the problem to even fix this. I got to turn the faucet off. I got to stop the leak. Then I can go, then we can understand how to mend and help. Verse 23. Now, after they became fools, it says, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man. Now, we talked about some of this in our Antichrist study. Remember now how they became vain in their imaginations. Remember, we talked about this reason, this idea of man, the autonomy of man, exalt themselves above all that is called God. Paul gonna try to address a wide spectrum of things here. So you have that aspect where they became fools. Then you got this other aspect. They changed the glory of God into they changed the glory of the incorruptible God, his glory, into an image made like to corruptible man. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If we go to Psalms 19, I know the family, they sing that Psalm 19. They know that's one of my favorites. That's one of my favorites. When they sing that Psalm 19, because of what it say. I'm telling you, I like all the Psalms, but this one you have other Psalms like it. But consider what we're saying, and change the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man. So when we talk about the glory of God, that's not just one thing either. It's not one or the other. The teachings of these scriptures is not one dimensional. And that's where people stumble. In the West, that's how we think. That's how we've been trained to think. That's how the Gentiles think. One dimension. Okay, well, you need vitamin C. We're going to extract vitamin C, give you vitamin C. But see, they looking at it one dimension. They don't see vitamin C only works in the formula inside of the orange and all of the other nutrients inside of the orange or the grapefruit. You just can't extract the vitamin C and expect the same result. You need it all. But that's how we think sometimes, one dimensional. And some people argue, I think that way. But we can argue it. Now, look. But when it comes to the God of heaven, that's exactly what it boils down to. What does Psalms 19 say? The heavens declare the glory of God. What do? The heavens. The heavens declare the glory of God. Now, notice what we're reading here in Romans. And change the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man. How do the heavens declare the glory of God? And the firmament showeth his handiwork. He says that the heavens declare the glory. Day unto day, verse 2, day unto day uttereth speech, the heavens. And night unto night, it teaches us. It shows knowledge. Of course it shows knowledge. The course and from the moon to the sun, its structure, its build, it's a miracle. Nobody knows why it's standing out there. No one knows how it runs its course. The clouds, the movement, everything we see, the gases, the air, the cosmos, sun, moon, and stars, and everything in the cosmos declare his glory. Okay. And there is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. The line is gone out through all the earth. All men have seen it. The knowledge been exposed to all men of the glory of the heavens, which is the glory of the Almighty. And their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. Now, he began to describe the glory of one aspect of the glory of God. Now, let's see what happened with the nations. See that it said here, Paul said they changed the glory of God of the incorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man. Now we see this all the time. Who did they consider Isis or Osiris? The sun, but not literally. The glory of the sun, the attributes of the sun. They didn't just glorify God saying you have provided the sun and gave us these blessings. No, you turned it into a man. You personified it. And guess who personified it? The ruling class. See, when you look at the knowledges, I'm jumping back to Egypt and going to confirm it up here with Rome, because Rome is none other than the students of the Egyptians. The Egyptians are actually the students of the Babylonians, and they're all the students of Noah. They just corrupted themselves. The preacher of righteousness, they just corrupted themselves from the original teachings of the fathers. So Rome learned from the Greeks. Greeks learned from the Egyptians. Egyptians learned from, well, the Egyptians and Babylonians learned from Ham. Now, with these knowledges, they turned the glory of God and began to create what they call mysteries and sciences and knowledges. And in these mystery schools, they were not allowed to tell the common man. So if they wasn't allowed to tell a common man, these mystery schools, guess who knew how to read? Guess who knew how to write? It was the scribes, even in Egypt and Babylonia. This wasn't a regular man. So even when we're talking about those who become vain in their imaginations and their foolish hearts was darkened, we're talking about, like we read last week, we have the rise of the state. A small group of people who begin to elevate themselves among others. Learn different knowledges and sciences, suppress it, hide it from others. This is just in history. It goes on to this day. There's certain knowledges that they just will not teach the common laborer. But the ruling class send their children to schools and they learn sciences and they learn other things that they don't even offer. Okay, so that's not new. But if we want to understand, to catch up and even excel, we got to search the scriptures. We're gonna find the Creator gonna teach us. But nevertheless, what did they turn? They turned the sun into a personification of a man, or birds, or four-footed beasts and creeping things. The snake is a creeping thing. He became personified with the sun. everlasting life, because he shed his skin, be renewed. He gathered his heat and energy by resting in the sun. So all of these sciences, the ruling people, the educated people, the people who claim to be wise, began to corrupt themselves. And guess why they began to, guess what they did through this corruption? They created religions, which further subdued and harnessed the labors of the people. Watch, this, because remember, this is what Paul's arguing, the justice of God and the injustice of men. This is his argument. I didn't make it up. It's just something he already established in the previous verses. Now let's look at a little bit of this. Now I say that with Egypt and Babylon. Let's just move a little bit forward to Rome. Okay, just a little bit. Now, the Romans, in the context of the Romans, in the context of these old Romans, let's look and see when they begin to change the glory of the incorruptible God. Made like unto corruptible men, they made them like unto birds. His glory, see. So if his glory is the sun and the moon and the stars, then they personified these things and formed a pattern of servitude and created superstitions. And they didn't do it for nothing either. They did it, guess for what reason? You'll never believe. You say, Brother Judah, you say commerce is, you always talking about commerce, Brother Judah. You trying to say everything got to deal with commerce? No, not everything, but just the things that deal with commerce. You understand? And when we search the scriptures, whatever isn't talking about commerce, we won't mention commerce. But whatever it is, then that's just what it is. I didn't make it up. I'm just going off of the research. But however, the elders did teach us. What's the root of all evil? He ain't say some. He said the root of all evil, the love of wealth. That's the cause of it all. So I don't think I'm far-fetched when you boiling all of this right back down to the accumulation and augmentation of wealth, corrupting societies, and changing the incorruptible, the glory of the incorruptible God is directly tied into injustice. Because if the glory of God, if these men would have listened and continued and never broke from the teaching of the elders, even if you start from Noah, it would prevail. Justice would prevail. But in history, anthropologists, all of them teach it. There was a break in that smooth transition of the society as new generations were born. There was a break. Just like in the Genesis tell us the break with Cain. It was a break. He rose up, slew Abel. Next thing you know, he building a city. Next thing, it was a break from the traditional manner. And Josephus explains this when he talks about Cain in the book of Josephus, the history of the Jews. Who did the Romans bring into play? The Romans. Made like unto the image of corruptible man. Let's see. Who was the first, who became really popular in Rome? The heavens declares the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. How does the heaven declare his glory? Because when you behold it, you are beholding the glory of God. And guess what the Romans did? They came up with the carbon copy of the Greek deity Zeus. You know what Zeus means? And brother and sister, please forgive me if I don't entertain all of the rhetoric and sophistries or this imaginary lies that tickles people's ear and it sounds like it's the truth with Zeus and Jesus and all. No. That you won't get that kind of an entertainment here. We don't have no time for that foolishness. Most people don't even know what Zeus means. Zeus means sky. Old Indo-European word before the Greek civilization. So the carbon copy of Zeus is Jupiter. Jupiter. All right, now who's messing around up here now? Now we have you got to get back to your post. Got to get to your post. Jupiter was known as the Roman god of the heavens and the sky. He was considered to be the patron deity of the Roman state, ruling class, ruling elite. They the one who built this stuff up. All since the days of Nimrod, since the days of Cain, they built this stuff up because they needed to help in executing their injustices among men. So you mean to tell me Jupiter, same as Zeus? Jupiter was known as the Roman god of the heavens. So the glory of God, which is in the heavens and the sky, was what? What did the Apostle Saul say? He said, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God, his glory, see, into an image made like to corruptible man. So all of a sudden, the heavens and the sky and all of his glory have you personified. This is more than what they say anthropomorphism, you know, when you describe a deity with fingers. You done went all the way out. You done turned the heavens and personified the heavens. And don't forget, corruptible man, and to birds and to four-footed beasts. Now, we probably get a chance to look at it today, but what's interesting about Rome is that Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus. They were the children of Mars. We might look at it tonight before we close. And who nurtured them? The animals that was sacred to so-called Mars, a four-footed beast, a wolf. And who else? It was kind of funny. It's kind of funny when you do the research. A woodpecker, a bird and a four-footed beast. They were the ones that nurtured Rome. But we'll probably get to it. So if you're there 2,000 years ago and you know the jargon of the day, it will register what Paul is saying. When he's saying it, they know exactly what he's talking about, and not just in that one dimension. Zeus, Jupiter, eagles, bulls. So these are four-footed beasts. That was sacred to Zeus. A bull and eagles. And who was Zeus? We're going to look at him too. Or Jupiter, the man. So, but remember, the religions that's being created are only used as engines to manipulate and subdue the people, like today. That's why when you try to that's why when we argue, and that's what I've been convinced of. So I'm willing to argue it, man. Fight for it, go to war, go to combat for it. Is that, look, because I consider all what we've been taught in the name of these false religions a lie, the worship of Baalim. They still worship Baal. I have no allegiance to them, and I'm not conceding none of the teachings of the Torah for them or the prophets. In other words, all of these different religions, we're not friends. I don't care how nice they are. Do you believe that all the people worship Baal were just mean people? Are you deceived to believe that everyone who worshiped Baal or Ashtoreth were just mean people? You don't think that none were sincere people? Nice people? People who give you the coat off their back? Of course, you would be foolish to think that you didn't, everybody was just ravening fools and angry. Mm-mm. You had sincere people who worship Molech. They worship their deity sincerely. They were deceived into doing it. So today, I don't care who's sincere. It's not my call. Only thing I can go with is what the text say. That is the protection. That's why the Creator said, you got to get rid of these Canaanites because they're going to be a snare to you. You're going to see desirable things in them. Next thing you know, you got somebody who's a homosexual. You don't befriend them as a homosexual. Now it's hard to reprove them being homosexuals. You got these people who claim they believe in God, but yet they worship and serve Baalim and reject the Torah and the prophets. That's a problem. No concessions. And these people here who've been deceived by the ruling class to have all of this garbage shoved down their throat, mixed with truth and lies, because that's how you got to give it. You got to give it a mixture. It's a honey trap. You got to mix it with truth and lies, something sweet now, something you could swallow it down with. We got to stand for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what we have to stand for. We can't lean upon our own understanding, because they're normally misunderstandings. Now they have changed the truth of God. And then they done turn the glory into God and made it like unto a corruptible man. And what we have? Jupiter. Here he is here. These are images of Jupiter. Who we got next to Jupiter? An eagle. Fowl. Just like Paul talked about. Here we have Jupiter again. Next to him, 2 eagles. And in his hand supposed to be a thunderbolt. This is out of the New World Encyclopedia. He was considered the patron deity of the Roman state, in charge of laws and social order. Is that right? There's only one who's in charge of all law and social order. That is the mighty one whom Abraham served. But they have turned the glory of God into corruptible men. And you know, we've been taught to do that. That's why when people think of the God of Israel, who they think of? All but a man, where they think he's sitting in a chair like Jupiter. Jupiter is no God, but that's how people have personified the God of heaven. He's invisible. He don't sit nowhere in no temples. He's not sitting anywhere like the Greeks. They corrupted the glory of God. So now we say the master of all heavens and the cosmos, who created it all, we turn him into a man. Even those who claim to believe the Bible. The Greeks have done a number. And they did it for a reason. And their injustice prevailed, brothers and sisters, because what comes out of it? What comes out of the religions? Not justice. You understand what I'm trying to say? Not getting caught up in the foolishness of the superstition, but look what the superstition is doing. No matter if it's so-called Western Christianity, whether they're Muslims, look what it's doing. You say, brother, what is it doing? Exactly. Nothing. It's not bringing forth any justice. In that context, nothing. But Paul gonna run down what it is bringing. And if we look carefully and consider carefully as theoreticians and study social science, we realize what's coming from this superstition that the state have harnessed and used as a weapon against the populace. You ain't stand up ready to fight for nobody. You want to go out there, again, don't get me wrong. Food drives, everything like that. We are for that, but we for much more. In other words, right now, yeah, we got to buy the food from the people who's causing starvation. So in the meantime, we buy the food to feed the people, but we are determined to remove the people who's causing the starvation, those who own the land. And we got to wake the people up to turn, so they got to turn this loose. And a man who's hungry and all who is, everybody got to hear it. And all those who are his going to respond. The supreme deity of the Roman pantheon, mighty Jupiter, was a god of sky and thunder. The glory of God, you mean? Turn the glory of God into a corruptible man, whose symbols were the oak tree and what? The eagle. Jupiter was explicitly linked to a specific political entity, Rome. From the great temple erected in his honor in Capitoline Hill in Rome, Jupiter presided over the state and its ever-expanding empire. As a result, the Romans emphasized the worship of Jupiter above all other gods. Jupiter's blessings were thought to secure their victories and maintain hegemony or rule over their rivals. Politics. They're using Jupiter, the personification. They done turn the glory of God into man, and they have an ideology behind Jupiter. And guess what that ideology is? The culture of Rome. Jupiter presided over the culture of Rome. And guess what the culture of Rome was? Injustice, inequality. That's why that other Jesus whom they preach today, what do he preside over? All of the capitalists and unjust men can still pray to that Jesus. No. That's the other one Paul talked about. We're talking about the Jesus or Yahushua who Paul and the apostles taught and served and put themselves in alliance with. And that's the one that tear down and fight for justice. He tear down all injustice. So the truth of God will be no longer suppressed. Remember Paul's argument. Worship of Jupiter was formalized by the Roman state over the course of its existence. It's not original to Rome. All these religions, Egyptian religion of Osiris, the Babylonian religion of Gilgamesh, all of these superstitions are used to promote injustice. Look at all the religions today, and you let me know which religion fights against injustice. The closest you're going to get is the Christian. And when I mean the closer you're going to get, I mean the Christians who believe in liberation theology out of all other religions. But they fail to accept the way of life. So when I'm talking about what God is presenting in this, this is what James or Peter called true religion. A way of life, not this superstition. But the superstitious aspect, they may get close, call this thing liberation theology. We use that term sometimes. But with a little bit more meaning, I will argue than what they argue. Our Jesus is to liberate the oppressed. And the law is the constitution which shall maintain this society and build the kingdom of God. They think they're going to do it without the laws. So you find these religions, you find them. Now we got Jupiter, right? Is that what we got? We got Jupiter. So-called. Again, Paul argued there. What's their problem? 4-footed beasts, creeping things. Let's move forward. Let's look at this briefly. After that, we have Mars. He became the god of war. Look at this. Mars was a major Roman deity, second only to Jupiter. All of this, these deities, just as Nimrod was deified, are used by the state to suppress and subdue the people. So when Karl Marx argues that religion is the opiate of the masses, it helps you cope with injustice. But the teachings of the Bible Not only do you cope, but you struggle to overthrow injustice. And that's important. Mars was a major Roman deity, second only to Jupiter in the Roman pantheon. He began as a protector of agriculture. Now, who did the Torah tell you that the protector of agriculture is? That's all a part of the glory of God. Sun, moon, stars, right? Rain, clouds, the earth bring forth vegetation. The Torah teaches us that agriculture comes from the glory of God. The trees of the wood, the pomegranate, everything, they glorify God. They are a demonstration of his glory. It shows us his glory. But Mars, he began as a protector of agriculture, but later became the god of war, honored throughout the realm of the conquering Romans. This, you will find this information at www.mythencyclopedia.com. Look at the next one. Still at Mars. We're looking at Mars. We just want to look at briefly. Looking at this verse 23. The incorruptible God. I'm just building this. This is still in the context of the higher verse, verses 20, actually starting from verse 17 to 22, about the injustice. We're not breaking that apart at all. We didn't leave that point. Paul is building on the point and giving us the necessary information to show how this injustice is performed, its channels and the tools used to execute or to bring forth the injustice among men. And all of them, meanwhile, they think they're wise, especially the ruling class who's bringing this out. Mars was a major Roman deity, second only to Jupiter in the Roman pantheon. Wait a minute. He began as protector of agriculture, but later became the god of war, honored throughout the realm of the conquering Romans. The Romans admired Greek culture and absorbed Greek deities into their own. They came to identify their own war god Mars with the Greek war god Ares. He originally was associated with vegetation and fertility. Mars. Now you're taking all what God have made and you're turning it into corruptible man. As the Romans became increasingly warlike, Mars gradually developed into a god of war, but he never lost his connection with agriculture and the plant world entirely. So with the Gentiles call nature, sun, moon, stars, and everything that make the plants, everything grow, that force, gravitational force, photosynthesis, all this entire glorious creation, they are turning it into corruptible man. Fowls, he says, or birds, four-footed beasts. Look at this. Romulus and Remus, so-called children of Mars and Rhea Sylvia. These is one of the things I do remember them teaching us in school. I remember this dreadful looking, crazy looking statue. This is a wolf. And the so-called image of two twins, Romulus and Remus. Who are they? In Roman mythology, Romulus and his twin brother Remus were the founders of the city of Rome. They were the children of Rhea Silvia and Mars. Romulus and Remus, Ancient History Encyclopedia. So what we have here, we have the four-footed beast who was sacred to Mars. And it was also a woodpecker who brought him food. And the power of the woodpecker was in his beak. So the power of God, or the power of their God, or Mars, their strength and power, they would begin to be personified with wolves and birds, or the woodpecker in particular. But the woodpecker in particular isn't as famous as the other bird, the eagle. Remember, we're not talking about just the attributes of these creatures. They have created superstitions and ideologies behind these creatures for men to forsake. What is the doctrine of Romulus and Remus? Abominations. They're the founders of Rome and the culture of Rome. It's lawless. What is the doctrines of Nimrod? What is the doctrines of Osiris? What is the doctrine of Jupiter? What is his doctrines? What is he telling men to do? If Mars is the god of the Romans, so-called, or Ares of the Greeks, one and the same, they arguing that this is the god that supports them in their imperial missions. That's what we read. If you notice carefully. This is what we read if we look at this very carefully. In fact, it was not just Mars, but Jupiter, head of Mars. Notice at the bottom, the last sentence, Jupiter's blessings were thought to secure the victories and maintain hegemony over the Roman rivals. Now, what we have already researched, what were Roman doing? What were they doing? They were going around pillaging, oppressing, extracting the resources, exploiting labor. This was the doctrines of Jupiter. He overseen this kind of a doctrine. And what was it? Injustice. So to change the glory of God into a corruptible man, all of the schools of Socrates and Plato who believed in these gods, they used these gods, and they became vain in their imaginations, using them or believing in them, and believed in the culture in which these gods represented, and it was a culture of injustice, just like it is today. I don't want to beat a dead horse, and I don't want to do that, but I want repetition. I want us to look at the connections. Let's go back to where we were. We're looking at Mars. After Mars, he was also associated with plants. After him, he had, we looked at Romulus and Remus, got that four-footed beast. Let's look at another one. Minerva. She was a part of that triad deity. Now, what do Minerva represent? Minerva, Roman false deity, the wisest of Roman deities. Minerva was the goddess of intelligence or wisdom. Wisdom is in the bosom of the God of heaven. Sure, wisdom is personified as a female, or should I say identified with, in the Hebrew, she's described as a female, as a feminine article. But the Hebrews never personified her or made a human figure to worship. It was just a feminine, the wisdom was used in a feminine sense. Not to create a woman's statue. She was the goddess of intelligence, philosophy, craftsmanship, art, and inspiration. They professed themselves to be wise, but they became fools. She was a supposed daughter of Mars. And guess how she was brought forth? Mars bare Minerva. And she came forth out of his forehead. And their mythology. Why? Why she come forth out of his forehead? Because she represented intelligence. So she came forth out of his head. So these were like the secret mysteries and knowledges only the educated class knew. The educated class. And they used these sciences and the corruption of these sciences and knowledges to oppress men like they do today. Minerva was the Roman goddess of wisdom, medicine, commerce, handicrafts, all this stuff, wisdom, healing. These are attributes of the God of heaven, not to be personified into some kind of a superstition. Poetry and the arts in general, and later war, in many ways similar to the Greek goddess Athena. She had important temples in Rome and was a patron of the Quinquatras festival. Originally, Minerva was an Italian goddess of handicrafts closely associated with the Greek goddess Athena. And it's a lot of other attributes. You can trace her right back down to Semiramis or Isis. Okay? And this is the so-called Queen Mother. She bears the sun and all this other madness. Don't get caught in the superstition, because the superstition is confusing. They overlap often. Just know why they use the superstition, because that's what Paul's arguing. They becoming darkened. They're rejecting God. So therefore, injustice prevails. And normally when we read and study these things, justice is never an argument. They just keep focusing on the superstitions of these so-called gods. They are no gods. They're just ideologies created by the rulers. That's all they are. Ideology created by the ruling class. And it was forced on the masses. So let's look at this. Before we move forward, because again, we're going to finish this chapter. So we're going to, our next point is going to be starting from verse 54 to 32. And that's what we want to look at today, finish up with today. Now look, I was arguing this, Roman religion and economics. So I want you to walk away with all of this Paul was explaining in verse 23. It all is still built on the injustice of men, just like it is today. Religion is built for the suppression and to oppress and plunder the world. From institutions to individuals, religion shaped the Roman economy. We find this in Egypt. The Egyptians argue the same thing. The temples drove the local economy. You'll find the same thing in Babylon. The first banks, the first banks, you can look this up. Banks, banking institutions are derived from Babylon. And guess what they were? They were the Babylonian temples. They were the first banks. And here we thought banks wasn't religious. No. Guess what? Banks house the god Mammon. And all of the Mammonists frequent the place. Now it says, from institutions to individuals, religion shaped the Roman economy. Temples served as treasuries and banks, and priesthoods came with political power. See, all of these religions that Paul is running down, how they corrupt the God, his argument is still from the previous verses, how the wickedness and the injustice of men have suppressed, held back the truth and justice of God. Religion is one of the tools. So when we and guess who's established this? The ruling class. The priesthoods came with political power. The expansion of Roman religion transformed economies throughout the empire, affecting established institutions and creating new centers of sacred consumption and production. The Roman religion mobilized vast quantities of wealth and resources. But tension between traditional piety and wait a minute. Okay, no. Okay, I didn't even pay attention to that. Nancio, I want to say, I'm thinking that I have that clipped off. Tensions between traditional piety and says Nancio, but from me reading it, I remember it should be financial. I'm just trying to see. Yes, I clipped it off. So there was tension between traditional piety and financial expenditure. It remained. This dynamic interplay between religion and the economy created a complex system. It created a complex system that has hitherto received what? Little attention. This was a seminar. You can read this right up in a seminar that was in 2015. But that's true. The economics behind religion received little attention. Why? Why you think? They don't want us to know? But let's move forward. So we see this idea that Paul was breaking down in the 23rd verse is still tied into when he was talking about how men forsook God through the injustice of men. They have suppressed the truth of God. So this idea of justice and equity in a society of justice and equity, these religions which prevail overturns that. And now you have hierarchy. And ahead of the hierarchy is the king. And then the priest. And then the nobles. And guess how they keep the rest of the people at the bottom? By their religion. And that's what I argue about false Christianity today. Give a dog on them. Don't let familiarity and friendship get in the way. We got to deal with what's going on. We're in a struggle for freedom. All these people who claim they worship in the God of heaven, they still worship Baal. And if you're going to determine whether you're going to combat them or not because of their sincerity, that might be a mistake. Because like I said earlier, people were sincere when they served Mars. Them Roman soldiers were sincere. You can't say, according to what man will argue, they were just bad people. No. Some of them believed in their family. Some of them believed in what they sincerely. They wasn't robbers and thieves, all of them. But they believed. And God telling us to shake that loose. Now we got to establish with the truth of God, because if you tolerate that, then you're given a platform for the injustice and the religion of men to continue to undermine the mission. Next thing you know, you can't rebuke nobody because they're your friend. They good peoples. Nah, man, look, no. Let's like the Messiah said, there's none good but God. Make no theoretical concessions, because it's not ours to make. He established the law. He established the book. He told men to follow it. Follow it. And if you don't understand it now, you follow it, and it will be revealed later. Let's move forward. Now, look what he's getting into. And this is what again, I said we're gonna go into chapter 2. No, we're not. We're just gonna deal with this chapter 1. We're gonna look at this other point Paul is bringing. Remember, it's all together now. It's chain linked. The injustice. Now he's going into the aspects of the injustice. What causes it? The corruption of men have made their imaginations vain. This is these same men whose vain imaginations have prevailed. They are your rulers. And if these are the rulers, remember I told you why Christ confronted the ruling class. See, he challenged them. He rebuked them. The scripture says it is the shepherds that have caused the flock to go astray. If we look at all of the corruption and the struggles in society, you can trace it back to the shepherds. And when I say shepherds, I'm not talking about what Western religion calls shepherds. I'm talking about what the Bible calls shepherds. These are political leaders. These are your governors, your mayors, your kings, your leaders. Through their corruption, they have caused injustice. And because of injustice, it's going to cause a lot of problems. And look what one problem that the injustice, look what the ruling class began to do. Look at this. This is very interesting. Look what the ruling class began to do. Because when I was studying this, I said, man, this is exactly what's happening today in our world of fornication. Look at this. Romans 1:24. Let's read this. And we're going to break this down. We're going to read this through, and we're going to look at a few things. We're going to close for this evening so we can regroup, think on some stuff, and make our transition into chapter 2. But not this week. We won't look at 2 this week. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts. Remember, all of this is still together now. The injustice of men is prevailing. The truth of God is being restrained. Those who are ruling over the society, they have taken the glory of God and made corruptible men to represent the glory of God. They have used birds, four-footed beasts. All of this is in the religions of men. All of this is in the religions of men. Now look, wherefore God gave them up to the uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts. What do you mean he gave them up? In other words, they don't want, God not going to wrestle you. You got to be, Paul told him in Acts the 17th chapter, you must search after God. He's not far, but you got to search. Some texts say grope. You got to search. You got to show that you are worthy. How much do you want him? Cats spend their last little energies, little energy they got left to make $1. But when it comes to God, you ain't got to do nothing much. All the spirit just overtake you. You go ahead, you keep on believing that. And they think you're gonna be running around here, you're gonna have a spirit, all right. So we don't want that. We want the spirit of God. And how do we do that? What did the prophet say? Search. God willing, I'm thinking about even, for the class to, we got different days where we doing studies, but, open up another studies, examining the Proverbs and stuff like that. We got to get into this text, the spirit of God, the wisdom of God. Proverbs tell you how to get it. It's not like this, though, not like these Romans. Now, what did they begin to do? Through the lust of their own flesh, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Now, what I have before you, these 2 slides are important. Now, these 2 slides we're going to look at. These are the 2 slides we're going to look at before we close out for the day, because this is what Paul began to talk about. Through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies. We have an eagle and we have a young boy. And here, we got a part of the ruling class, little crown on, and we got a woman here. We got a woman here. We're going to find out this culture. Same culture today. I mean, the exact same culture today. They begin to dishonor their bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie. They've been suppressing the truth with injustice. This is the lie out of the depths of hell. Their doctrines of injustice. Their doctrines of distribution of the goods. This class society. All of these are doctrines of the devils. Mercantilism and all this other stuff that's going on through exploitation. I'm not talking about a person laboring, getting what they deserve. That's not even a context. I'm talking about exploitation. They changed the truth of God into a lie. Justice and equity, they changed it into, they made injustice. seemed to be the norm of the day, and worship and serve the creature more than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Now for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. Now, you see what's happening. Paul started off talking about how injustice started, or how injustice suppressed the truth of God. And then he began to look at the strength of this injustice. Men begin to take the glory of God and personify. They turn it into, in so many words, this is what Paul is arguing, they turn it into different superstitions and faiths, ideologies of the gods. And what did this lead to? A darkening of their hearts. They began to be foolish. But all in the meanwhile, they think they're wise. Because, like I said, it's a formula. Man don't understand the body. You live in it, but I'm guaranteed you don't understand it. You don't know how it works. Scientists trying to figure this out to this day. God know how it works. And he's trying to tell you, unless you keep my laws, there's different things that this body will do that you don't know about, that is going to throw you for a loop. So you need to do what I tell you. And that's going to cause the right reactions in your environment to lead you to where I need you to be, so other secrets could be revealed to you until you make your change. But if you don't do it and you don't follow the formula, the body will be, things will be triggered off in the body. You don't know nothing about it. You're just going to respond because you're going off of feelings and emotions, and you don't even understand them. You have them, but you don't understand them. You don't understand the source of them. The body is complex. That's why me personally believe in that. That's what makes the law even more important. Because it's things about the body I don't know. So if this creator has made this, then I need to follow the blueprint. I need to follow it. They didn't follow it. And then what began to happen in the body? They began to dishonor their bodies. They didn't even know it though. They didn't know they were doing it. It was just something that was conjured up in the heart, in the feelings, cravings. You didn't know these cravings will be set off. You didn't even know it. You didn't even know you would feel that way. But if you want a certain course, you know, it'll catch you. Whoever knew that the body will crave crack rock or any kind of a drug or any kind of a habit, it'll crave it so much that you got to struggle. It's sometimes it seems like you're just constantly defeated trying to break habits. Did you know that the body will take you there? What triggered it? Mysteries. How in the world you get so hungry that you're ready to butcher and eat your children? Did you even know that the body can call? What will trigger the body to do something like that when you eat your own kids? That he spoke about in the book of the law. You see, we are dealing with something very complex. And that's why the law is very important. Because the law understands what this body needs to be trained in and what habits this body must pick up for the well-being of itself and the other bodies around it and the rest of this creation. If not, God will cause them to fall to vile affections. You're going to trigger something off in the body you didn't even know was there. Talking about some damn Pandora's box. You mess around with this, what we living in, it's going to catch you off into something that you would never, just throw you for a loop. So you better be safe. Listen to what he say. Man shall live by the word of the Elohim. That's how man shall live by. He shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that cometh out of the mouth of the mighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Period. You play around with that, you messing around in something you ain't, I'm telling you, not ready for it. And a lot of people find they're not ready for it. Look what Paul's saying. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another. And believe me, the natural use of the woman isn't just to have children. See, that's what we taught in this culture. Yeah, she have children. That is a part of her natural abilities. But she's been made to help man. This isn't a lesson on that. But we need to understand this. Because I've heard cats say, well, listen, woman, listen, I wasn't made for you, but you was made for me. I was talking on the phone to some cats, boy, I tell you, I had to help get off that phone call too. Because I probably would have got rude. Because some people think I'm rude already, but I really would have got rude. They would have had a whole lot to say about me on social media. So I had to get off the phone. And think, because again, they profess themselves to be wise, and they telling me on how the woman was made for the man and not man for the woman. See, they understand it from the imperialist aspect. And I didn't say nothing. But I'm letting the brothers and sisters know now, it's how you look at that. Now look at it. In the context of Genesis, because we're looking at this natural use of the woman. That's true. The woman was made for the man to be a helpmeet. Now the word help that's used for her being a helpmeet in Genesis is the same word used. The gravity of that word is the same word used on how God helps Israel. See, it's not a help that she's helping you like you can get along without her, but here, come on, give me a hand. The help used in the Hebrew, like I've explained before, is a help that you need her to save your life. See, she's a element there. She is the part of man there that's needed in a life and death situation. See, so that's why he looked upon man. He was alone. That's not good. I got to make him a help me. He gonna need some help, or he ain't gonna make it. So therefore, you're right. The woman was made because you can say, and I say this to provoke, the woman was made because we needed her. She ain't need us. Right? I mean, if they want to run with that argument, well, she was made for man. She was made for man. Not man wasn't made for her. Well, Craig looked upon man and said, brother, you're going to need some help. Let me get you some help. And so he got us some help. And if you look at the society today, the foundations of the society is the family. See, it makes sense why Satan attacked the woman. Yeah, that makes sense why he went to her. But we're not getting into that tonight. But the natural use is that she's there to aid, to help rule the planet. But her natural use was changed. And guess what she became in the Roman world? A domestic slave. That's what she became. A domestic slave that was only there to have babies and to raise children. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burn in their lust one toward another. Men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was met. So the natural use of the woman isn't just to have no kids, though. See, if you look at her as an object, that's all she would be, is just an object of lust. And that's what's going to happen. Your lust going to prevail, your vile affections. If you're lawless, if you don't understand, you're going to be led to just these uncontrollable cravings. It's like they say, you know what? Because it's just gone so far now, even a woman can't satisfy the craving. And what happened? Men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which is good. You see what Paul said? Good. What you get for doing is good for you. Why is this happening? And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, this is why it's happening. Not only is the woman there that bring forth children, and the women and men can enjoy one another, have affection towards one another, but it's on a different level when you understand her position. And right now, the woman been thrust from her position, but she got to be re-educated to get back in her position. Just like a slave. You looked at a slave, he was just good for nothing. He ain't do nothing but push a plow. He couldn't do nothing, he was just hands. You didn't talk to him. You didn't look for him to help rule or do anything. He was just a slave. He's just a yard hand. You know how long it took for so-called African Americans to break that stigma? Because their ignorance complemented that stigma. It ain't good for nothing. They ain't got no intelligence. No, that's not how they are inherently. It's how they was forced to turn into beast. Women aren't ignorant, inferior, but because of the injustice of men, it thrusts them into this position. So it appears that's just the way they are, but no, they got to be re-educated. Like the slave had to be educated to show that he's a man. And a woman got to be educated to stand up to show what a woman is. Heirs to rule the world. So we'll understand the complete use of the woman, not just some object of lust. And that object of lust that they look, even that aspect of the natural use, that because it was incomplete and they didn't like to retain God in their knowledge, what happens? God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. You see what's happening because of injustice? How one thing leads to another. Look what I want to look into. Now, this is out of Origin of the Family, Private Property and Estate by Frederick Ingalls, pages 127 and 128. This is the complement Romans chapter 1 from verses 22 to 28. Now look at what we just finished reading in Romans, and look at what Ingalls wrote. Euripides, Orestes. A woman is called an oikermia. A woman is called an oikermia. A thing. The word is neuter. But she's called a thing for looking after the house. Oikermia is what they called women. And what does it mean? A thing for looking after the house. And part from her business of bearing children, that was all she was for the Athenian and his chief female domestic servant. The man had his athletics and his public businesses, from which women were barred. In addition, he often had female slaves. Hebrews call them concubines. They often is madness too with his polygyny business. He often had female slaves at his disposal. And during the most flourishing days of Athens, an extensive system of prostitution, which the state at least favored. Now look at this system of prostitution that Ingalls is bringing to the table. But notice the order. It's the same order of Romans. We're reading how women became just an object. Apart from her business of keeping a house, she was just there to have children, and she became a female domestic slave. She was no longer, her use of helping run the society was removed. She just became an object of lust and to bear children. Notice the order. This is the same order Paul's bringing. Now that led into a degeneration of women. This injustice is all because of injustice. This led into a degeneration of women, which led into prostitution. See, when you look at the society and study prostitution with social science, it could probably explain why the Messiah didn't condemn no prostitutes. He taught them and told them to repent because there's certain social conditions which creates the prostitute. So in religion today, we don't address the social system. We want to scorn a prostitute. A flourish in the most flourishing days of Athens, an extensive system of prostitution flourished. An extensive system of prostitution which the state at least favored. Notice this. It was precisely through this system of prostitution. Notice this system he's arguing. See if y'all can see the same thing. I'm pretty sure you can. Watch this. It was precisely this system of prostitution that the only Greek women of personality were able to develop. Notice what he just said. Because it's not prostitution. That's how Marx and Engels and them wrote. He's not talking about a prostitution we thinking about where a woman is walking the streets, even though that's included in our overall argument. But they're showing another element of what we normally won't even call prostitution today. Today, we won't call it prostitution. And the Greeks didn't call it prostitution either. Engels is calling it prostitution because that's actually what it is. Watch this. A system of prostitution, leaving the natural use of the woman now, that the only Greek women of personality were able to develop and to acquire that intellectual and artistic culture by which they stand out as high above the general level of classic womanhood, as the Spartan women, by their qualities of character. Look what he's describing. He's talking about an educated class of women. What do we call them today? Professional women. This intellectual class of women. They stand out above the classic womanhood of Spartan by her certain characteristics. Notice this professional woman. See, professional woman, something different. That's what we call them today. But that a woman had to be hetera. This is the word, hetera. A woman had to be hetera before she could be a woman is the worst condemnation of the Athenian family. We got to find out what hetera means, because this is actually what Paul is describing. They left the natural use of the woman. Look what's going to happen. He's going to run it down as he studied the Greek society. Corruption among the ruling class. They created a certain class of women. They were intellectuals. They were educated. What did the hetera do? This Athenian family became, in time, the accepted model for domestic relations. The hetera was for domestic relations. You see them all the time in Washington. They walk the streets. They're the educated woman out of the universities, going from man to man. Because the culture of marriage, and even if you're married, you still have heteros. Women on the side. Hebrews so-called get fancy, call them concubines. What's the root of it? Injustice. Once woman was thrust from her way, injustice prevailed. So when we're looking at fornication, this is a byproduct of injustice. This Athenian family became in time the accepted model for domestic relations, not only among the Ionian, but to an increasing extent among all the Greeks of the mainland and colonies also. But in spite of locks and guards, because men tried to guard their own wives while they went out after the heteros, These wasn't prostitutes. These were educated women in a university. It was women of arts, artistic. These were professional women who went from man to man. What we see in our neighborhoods today. I grew up around stuff like that. Many of us have. They weren't considered a prostitute. They had a job. They didn't walk the streets. But because of the injustice of men exploited these women, and they literally became, like the Bible called, a whore. because you didn't look at her. You left the natural use. You forgot what she was even made for. And she becomes an object. And this is something that the women are fighting today. Even when they're trying to make it to the Bible to find liberation, these clowns who going back to Old Testament, Old Covenant Israel, imperfect Israel, they still trying to subject the woman to the hetera, but they call her concubines, second wife, sister wife. They still got these fancy names. And people say, well, you know what, God, Abraham had a lot of wives. Abraham had slaves too. And every time I talk about that, I got to bring that together. If you're going to fight for the institution of polygyny, then you got to fight for slavery. If you separate them, you are a hypocrite and you're contradicting yourself. Put the book down. Take it all. Don't just pick and choose because you want to fulfill your lust. That's not what we offer here. God willing, we would never do that. He will lead us to the path of liberation. And in order for us to get to liberation, for justice to prevail, we got to put all this together. Morals and everything got to be all put together. And the women got to be liberated, got to shake off the dust, and got to force them. They got to get there. And you're going to have to struggle with some of the women to get there, but those who going to struggle, get there. Help them get there. These heteros. But in spite of locks and guards, Greek women found plenty of opportunity for deceiving their husbands. Their husbands running out after the heteros. So what did the women do? They decided to deceive their husbands and go out and act a fool too. That's what Paul was explaining. Therefore, God gave them over to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. The woman going out to dishonor her body, the hetero dishonoring her body, the man is dishonoring his body and his wife's body and the woman who he's exploiting. All because of injustice. And where does it prevail? It starts because the ruling class have suppressed the justice and truth of God, so that it have fractured the society. And all of this evil is the result of man not following the formula set. All of these strange feelings and cravings. The women who have been ashamed to show any love for their wives, the men who have been ashamed to show any love for their wives, amuse themselves by all sorts of love affairs with the hetero. But this degradation of the women, these men in sitting in ruling class have degraded the women on all levels. Their own wives and the other women who are heteros who didn't even find their own husbands because they've been persuaded to dishonor their bodies. But this degradation of the women was avenged on the men and degraded them also till they fell into the abominable practice of sodomy. Isn't that what Paul was describing? Wherefore God gave them over to uncleanness through the lust of their own flesh, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. He says, verse 27, and likewise also the men leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error. This is what Frederick Engels is arguing. Origin of the private property of the state. And I must say this, if anyone ordered this book, everything in the book we don't agree with. Okay? But we're looking at what aligns with scriptures. What happened when men begin to dishonor their own bodies and men with men working that which is unseemly? What happened? Men who would have been ashamed to show any love for their wives amuse themselves by all sorts of love affairs with hetero. But this degradation of women, this exploitation of women, was avenged on the men and degraded them. It degraded the men also till they fell into the abominable practice of sodomy and degraded alike their gods and themselves with the myth of Ganymede. Anybody know what Ganymede is? If you don't know, you're gonna know tonight. And that's what we're gonna get ready to close with. Ganymede. You see what Frederick Engels is saying? Because of the injustice, the origin of the family and private property in the state rose up. These are the men who rose up with all of the superstitions which suppressed the truth of God. This fractured the society of justice. This led off into all immoral lusts. The human being body, out of the natural path in which God had it in, now have begun to run amok. Injustice prevails, lust prevails, and now from men thrusting a woman from her natural use, no longer recognizing her as joint heir, but looking at her as an object, she began to dishonor her body. He dishonored his body. So while he's out cheating, she's out cheating. When men with men, women with women even to the point where this sodomy and homosexuality prevailed among their gods. Ganymede. Ganymede. That's who I showed you earlier. Do y'all know this is Ganymede? This is Ganymede right here. This is a little boy, a boy. And guess who that eagle is? Remember Paul said, they have turned the glory of God into man and birds. Well, guess what? The glory of God, which represents the heavens, or the heavens, which is the glory of God, they turn it into Jupiter or Zeus, one and the same. Greek called him Jupiter, Greek called him Zeus, Romans called him Jupiter. And guess what Zeus was able to do? He was able to turn himself into an eagle. And he lusted after a little boy and captured him. That's Ganymede. And that's what Engels was arguing. Their sodomy and degradation even turned over into their myths. All this because of injustice. Romans, again, Hetera and Ganymede. Hetera, who is that? Hetera, one of a class of professional independent courtesans of ancient Greece who, besides developing physical beauty, cultivated their minds and talents. They were professional women to a degree far beyond that allowed to the average Athenian or Attic woman. Usually living fashionably alone, or sometimes two or three together, the heterae enjoyed an enviable and respected position of wealth and were protected and taxed by the state. They were professional women. They wasn't your average prostitute. These was educated women whom the ruling class slept with. Though they were generally foreigners, slaves, or free women, their freedom was greater than that of the married woman who was bound to seclusion or domestic slavery. All of this, the hetera, this is the hetera and the domestic slave is the two-edged sword of the ruling class who thrust a woman from her natural use as ruling this earth in justice, creating and cultivating the next generation that will sustain justice and harmony and create paradise on this earth. Everything turned to the floor. All because of injustice. They were often hired as entertainers, symposia, and family sacrifices, or for symposia and family sacrifices. The heteri of Corinth and Athens were especially noted for their outstanding physical and cultural accomplishments. Okay? Preen and Laius are historical representatives. That's hetera, professional women. Hetera, definition and meaning, Collins Dictionary. All right, that's where we get it from. What is she? Collins called her a female prostitute, especially an educated courtesan. Who is Ganymede? So this here is a old Greek right here in the corner to our right. This is hetera. Okay? And here we have Ganymede. Who is Ganymede? A Trojan boy of great beauty whom Zeus carried away to be his lover and to be cupbearer to the gods. Just what Paul says. How did it start? Injustice. Why did Jesus go and if we're going to attempt to address the social evils apart from addressing the source, we'll be chasing our tails. People think, well, you can't, these are the victims. We have to go to the source of this degradation of society. Zero in on it through the grace of God and crush it. That's why politics is very important. Very important. We get ready to close now. The origin of private property, the origin of the family, private property in the state by Frederick Engels. He continues, heterism is as much a social institution as any other. It continues the old sexual freedom. Old sexual freedom to the advantage of the men. It's an exploitation and injustice against the women. Actually not merely tolerated, but gaily practiced by the ruling classes particularly. This fracturing of society is because of the ruling class. Fornication, prostitution, robbery, theft, envy, strife. Yes, you got strife and envy because you've been stripped of your necessities. You can't trust your brother because he's hungry too. And if he get out of his hunger, he'll never want to return to it again. And if he got to rob you, if he got to compete with you to get it, if he got to fulfill his lust with women, that's what he's going to do because he's been stripped of the justice of God because of the society in which the ruling class have put in place. That's why their civilization must be crushed. And we got to learn how to do it. Actually, not merely tolerated, but gaily practiced by the ruling class particularly. It is condemned in words. Ruling class condemned horror. They tell you, they speak good. But the ruling class is the reason why all of this prevails today. They are the chief reason. Each individual have their own responsibilities. But we must think scientifically and trace the roots of the evils we see in our neighborhoods. Why is it so much abortion? Why is it so much fornication? Why? What kind of society have we been put in? And is it the causation that provoked men to evils? And once we begin to understand the problem, it helps us find a solution. When we spread the gospel and begin to teach people the problem, that's a burden lifting off people where they can begin to understand the real issue. And then you give them something to fight for. That's the reasoning that I have. But in reality, this condemnation never falls on the men concerned. They condemn whoredom, but it's never on the men. They can have as many women as they want. All you got to do is call your second, third, fourth, fifth, 15th wife concubine and get too many wives, concubine. but only it falls on the women. They are despised and outcast in order that the unconditional supremacy of men over the female sex may be once more proclaimed as a fundamental law of society. It's interesting to see all of the evils and lawlessness and lust, how you can tie it, and it is just briefing. You tie it right into the ruling class. So we're going to conclude with this. This is Ganymede. After Zeus turned into the eagle, he turned back into the man, and they just got the eagle representing Zeus, and they got the little boy up under Zeus' arms, or Jupiter. And here is when he was an eagle, and he's coming to take Ganymede away. Being filled with all unrighteousness, or here Paul is repeating it as he closed on this chapter, or this section of the letter, being filled with all injustice. See what he put first? They're filled with injustice. Fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit. Look what's causing this. If every man had his wife, if every man had a place to live, if every man was being able to be sustained, the majority of the people, I will argue, will not fall for this. They will not fall into this. But because the society has been fractured because of injustice or unrighteousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whispers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters. Look at the world we live in. You got to compete to live. This conjures the spirit of pride and boasting, evil and envy. He can eat, I can't. I want what he got. Inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, no more reverence. That's what this. See, the fear of the Lord is what caused men to walk rightly, according to the Proverbs. The fear of the Lord, that means reverence. Without understanding, covenant breakers can't even keep covenants. No regard. Why would you keep a covenant? You don't owe nobody nothing. At the end of the day, nobody means nothing. It's all about the individual. I got to do what I got to do. That is the sentiment of the world that injustice have created. How do we fix this? You got to go back to establish justice and teach what it is. Because justice will provide what we need. It will give us a living for human beings. Without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death. Not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So we're going to open it up with this, right? And just some of the things he was talking about, covetous. The idea he was explaining in covetousness was this Greek word is not just avarice, but it's a desire for advantage. That's what an unjust, uncorrupt world teaches us. You have a desire for an advantage. Everybody wants the advantage. Even in business, you got to have a plug where you can buy your stuff cheap and you can sell it high. You got to have an advantage, because an advantage is how you can control people. And control over people, these are the pillars of injustice. Unrighteousness, like he said, filled with all unrighteousness, injustice, malice, or kakia, wickedness. The idea of that, vicious disposition, spite, because the society have driven men mad. Wickedness, paneria, properly pain-ridden evil, derived from 4192, ponos, which refers to pain, pure and simple, resulting in toil. Then drudge, then, or that is bad, like, or our criminal behavior. Criminal behavior. What's driving men to this? Injustice. Look each word up on your time. Deceit, properly bait. But this is interesting with the deceit. This deceit is to hook or to allure people, especially those